Last week we saw Jesus at the height of his popularity. Thousands were seeking him out. But by the end of the following day, when he had told them that they needed to accept the fact that he had come down from heaven, that his teaching was hard, they said it was unfair for him to ask that someone who grew up amongst them, that they accept that he came down from heaven. That it would be painful for them to confess this publicly. That it would make things rough for them. That they would be tossed out of the synagogue. And to say that he was the only way to the Father was blasphemous. And they weren't going to listen to him anymore. And now it was only the 12 and a few others that were still willing to follow him. And this was because they had come to believe that he is the Christ, the Son of God. Remember, we talked about the outline of John. Right? As he started off his ministry, right, it was a point of consideration to look at him and to consider him as the Christ. And we saw now the controversy that has resulted as he's called people to accept what he truly is teaching. And now we're entering into a stage of conflict. Right? A time of chaos, a time of good versus evil. Is he really the Christ? Is the question in the center of what all of this conflict is about. So in John chapter 7 it says, "Now after these things Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. Now the feast of the tabernacles was at hand." So after these things, so after John chapter 6 and all of the events over the tabernacle, as people were going down to observe the Passover, so that would have been April. And now we're at the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and that occurs in October. So this time frame, Jesus has stayed up in Galilee for approximately around 6 months. And his brothers therefore said to him, "Depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also see the works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For even his brothers did not believe in him. So I used to think, right, maybe the brothers thought he was crazy. Right? But I think my thoughts have probably evolved a little bit around here. So why would they say he should go to Judea? Right? So that the crowds could see the miracles that he is performing. Right? They are aware of the signs that he is doing. But why do they think that he should go? Right? So that he can be known openly. What do politicians do? They go where the people are. And if that is his priority, to be king, right, then that would be the logical thing to do. Go make a big spectacle with your signs, and as a result of that, the people will follow you. But was building a large following the priority for Jesus? Was that the agenda driven by what he himself was seeking? No, we've clearly seen that from the events that took place in the last lessons that we have just looked at. Jesus says in John chapter 5, "I can of myself do nothing, for I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me." Jesus is continuously reinforced he is not working off of his own agenda. And this was not the feast for him to enter into the city to make a spectacle of himself. That time was still coming up in the future. So Jesus says to him, "My time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it, and its works are evil. I am testifying that the works of the people are evil, and they hate me as a result of it. You can travel openly to Jerusalem. You're not carrying that message with you. I can't do the same. If I was to spend 7 days in public in Jerusalem, they would kill me. And this is not the time. My Father knows when that time has come. So he says, you can go to the feast. I'm not going to take up to the feast, for my time is not yet fully come. When he had said these things, he remained in Galilee. But when his brothers had gone up, then he went to the feast, not openly, but as it was in secret. So his brothers go to the Feast of Tabernacles, right? A tabernacle just means a temporary dwelling place, and we read about this in Leviticus chapter 23. The timing of this was around mid-October. This was after the harvest. It started on a Sabbath and it ended on a Sabbath. And it was to observe the fire, grain, and drink offerings that would take place during this time. And the people would dwell in tabernacles. They would dwell in booths, tents. This was a celebration about how God cared for his people. It was actually the most joyous of the feast, right? Some of the traditions that were popular at this time was by day a pillar of smoke would rise up from the temple, and then at night they would light the temple with menorahs. And all throughout Jerusalem, people would see the temple lit up, and it would remind them how God led them with a pillar of fire in the wilderness. And one of the big opening ceremonies was the pouring of the water. The priests would take bowls to the pool of Siloam, and they would blow trumpets and cymbals, and the people would cheer, and they would wave palm leaves, and they would sing the ascent psalms, which are Psalms 113 through 118, and the priests would pour the water around the altar. And then on the last day, they would circle it 7 times, and they would pour the bowls, and the people would cheer. Right? This was it was a time of celebration, a time of joy, to remember how God had cared for his people. The Talmud had written the following description about this, and it said, right, he who has not seen the rejoicing at the palace of the water drawing has never seen rejoicing in his life. It was a time of tremendous celebration. And it's at this celebration, right, there are a lot of questions around Jesus. Some are saying he is the Christ. Others are saying he is a deceiver and that he leads people astray. We see a lot of controversy. We see a lot of conflict going on. So then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, "Where is he?" And there was much complaining among the people concerning him. Some said he is good. Others said, no, on the contrary, he deceives the people. Right? Some are saying, right, he is good. He is from God. Others are saying that he deceives the people. Now in Deuteronomy 13, we're told that one day there could arise a prophet, a dreamer of dreams, and he could perform signs. And if those signs and wonders come to pass, but then that person tells you, let us follow other gods, don't listen to him and don't serve them, right? Instead, God is testing you to see whether you truly love him with all of your heart and all of your soul. So while some people are saying, look, he's doing these signs, this shows he is from God, other people are saying, oh, wait, no, he's a deceiver. And he's trying to lure you away from God. But is that what Jesus is trying to do at all? Is he trying to pull them away from the God of Abraham and the God of their fathers? And what we see is no. He's trying to get them to understand the God of their fathers more, to actually be obedient to them and to listen to him. But one thing we see is no one would speak openly of him for fear of the Jews, right? The Jewish leaders, the establishment, they have put the notice out. And if anyone speaks openly of Jesus and confess that he is the Christ, there will be consequences. So now about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. Jesus had come in quietly, right? The Jewish leaders probably thought, he never even showed up. He must be scared of us, right? And now their attention is focused on the ceremonies and the feast. And about halfway through the week, however, Jesus goes to the temple to teach. And the Jews, the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, they marvel, saying, how does this man know letters, having never studied? Right? It was an important part for the rabbis and the leaders to state who they learned from. In fact, in their writings, they would usually quote what prior rabbis had determined. And here is Jesus, and he's in Jerusalem, and he's in the temple, and he's teaching. Well, where did he get this formal training that would authorize him to do so? And where did he get his perspectives and his background training to be able to pick up the teaching that he is doing? Jesus answered them and said, my doctrine is not mine, but it's he who sent me. If anyone wills to do his will, he shall know concerning the doctrine whether it was from God or whether I speak on my own authority. Right? Remember, think back, John chapter 6, right? It is written that they shall be taught by God. Well, how does God draw people, right? He draws them by hearing, and they learn from him. And those are the people that come to him. What Jesus is saying is, this is not my teaching. Listen to it, and you can tell this teaching truly comes from the Father. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. Did not Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keep the law. Why do you seek to kill me? He says you claim to be concerned about following the law. And that's why they're concerned about him, that somehow he had violated the Sabbath when he had told the man to pick up his mat and walk. But there are other commandments God had also given as well, such as you shall not murder. You don't seem to be as concerned about that as you're seeking to kill me. And the people answered and said, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Now, a lot of these people were from out of town and do not realize that the Pharisees or the religious leaders had already made the determination that Jesus needed to die. Right? But Jesus answered and said to them, I did one work and you all marveled. Well, what was the one work that Jesus had done in Jerusalem? Right? The healing of the lame man. Right? They were amazed by that sign. And now that he had made a lame man walk, but he did it on the Sabbath, right? What he says is, Moses therefore gave you circumcision. Not that it came from Moses, but from the fathers, right? Circumcision went all the way back to the time of Abraham and Isaac. It was not from Moses. And he says, you circumcise a man on the Sabbath, right? Were Jewish males commanded to be circumcised? And the answer was yes, and they were to be circumcised upon the 8th day. Well, was there ever a Jewish male that was born on a Friday? So then the 8th day fell on a Sabbath. Now remember, those 39 categories that we looked at that defined work, would circumcision then qualify as work? Right? So now they would have to look at the facts and weigh this out. And what they determined was, even if the 8th day was the Sabbath, that the circumcision commandment overruled their tradition definement of what work was in that classification of work. So, he says, if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? And what he's telling them is, you will violate the Sabbath according to your definition of what work is for a tiny piece of foreskin to make that person the way that God wants him to be. Now I took this man and I made his whole body whole, the way that God really wants him to be. How much greater of a reason must that be for the thing that I did, an act of love and mercy, than what you do every Sabbath, which is of much lesser benefit for that person? He says, "Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment." Now, some of them from Jerusalem said, "Is this not whom they seek to kill? But look, he speaks boldly, and they say nothing to him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is truly the Christ?" Right? So if there's this great dispute between the religious leaders and Jesus, why are they not stopping him from speaking? Could it actually be then that they realize this is indeed the Christ? However, we know where this man is from, right? We know. Well, do they really know? The answer to that was no. Were they willing to find out? Not all the way to put that effort into it, right? A lot of people think that they know about Jesus, but lots of times what we see is that what they think that they know and what is really to know about Jesus, that they're often wrong in their first impressions. But he says that when the Christ comes, we know where he is from. Now, a common belief in Jewish writings was that the Messiah was not going to have an origin. Malachi talks about how the Messiah will suddenly come to the temple and cleanse it. And we saw that happen at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry in John chapter 2. And they thought that then he would come from Bethlehem. But he would come from Bethlehem, but he would just suddenly appear in the temple. But Jesus was the son of Joseph and Mary from Galilee, right? We know where he came from. But Jesus cried out, and he loudly shouts at them as he taught in the temple, and saying, "You both know me, and you know where I am from, and I have not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. You know where I am from on this earth," he's telling them, "but I'm not here by my own will or motives. You know far less than what you think you know, because you don't know the Father who sent me. But I know him, for I am from him, and he sent me." Right? He is telling them, I know the Father's in ways you can't possibly know. Because since the very beginning, I was there with them. You've never seen them. I was there at his side. And this is the one who sent me. Therefore they sought all the more to take him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. The crowds are ready to grab him right there themselves, but God is not going to allow it at this time. Now many of the people believed in him and said, "When the Christ comes, will he do more signs than those which this man has done?" If this man is not the Christ, how many more signs will the next person need to perform that would cause us then to listen to him instead? Well, now the news has reached the Pharisees, right? They're hearing complaints about what Jesus is saying in the temple and the murmuring about wanting them to put their faith in him. So they send officers to arrest him. So Jesus says to them, "I shall be with you a little while longer, and then I go to him who sent me. You will seek me and not find me, and where I am, you cannot come." He tells them, "I will be here only a little while longer, and then I'm going to go back to the Father. You will be here when I am resurrected. You will search in my tomb, you will not find me. You'll seek me out, you will not find me, because I will have gone back to the Father. And since you have rejected me, your only access to the Father, you will not be allowed to go where I am going." Not sure that they really would have put all of this together at this point, but that is what Jesus is telling him. So the Jews then say among themselves, "Where does he intend to go that we shall not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and to teach the Greeks?" One of the things we've seen is his own people have rejected him. So if he is going to go where we can't find them, then he must be getting ready to leave Israel, because no one here wants to listen to him. Maybe go try and teach among the Greeks who do not know God the way that we do. And what is this thing that he says, you will seek me and not find me, and where I am you cannot come? So on that last day, the great day of the feast, right? So this was the day of that concluding ceremony. The priests would gather the water from the pool of Siloam. They would carry it through the streets up to the temple, and the people would cheer, and they would sing with each step. And the trumpets and the cymbals would blow and make noise, and the priests would march around the altar, not one, but 7 times. And they would pour out the water around the altar. And on that last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. You're celebrating God giving you water in the wilderness. Whoever comes to me will never hunger, they will never thirst, and out of their heart will flow rivers of living water. They will be a source of life-giving water to those that they come in contact with. That's our call as disciples. But this he spoke concerning the Spirit, whom those believing in him would receive. For the Holy Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. So the imagery of the Old Testament, how God would one day pour out his Spirit on the people, right? Isaiah 32 talks about how one day the Spirit will be poured upon us from on high, and the wilderness will become a fruitful field, right? A time of restoration, a time of God restoring his people. And I will pour out water on him who is thirsty, and floods on the dry ground. I will pour my Spirit. And he talks about how streams bursting forth in the desert, overtaking the lands, pouring over us, immersing us with his Spirit. But that time would not happen until after Christ was glorified. And glory is something that's going to be a focus a lot in the latter chapters of the book of John. Therefore, many from the crowd, when they heard this, saying, truly, this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. And so we can see people are seeing that Jesus is someone who is from God. And some said, but will the Christ come out of Galilee? Has not the scripture said that the Christ comes from the seed of David and from the town of Bethlehem where David was? Right? For others, what they were saying is, this doesn't line up with what they thought the Christ would be. Now, if they would look closer, they would see that Jesus grew up in Galilee, but he was actually, in fact, born in Bethlehem. Right? But the seed of David, not just a descendant, they were looking for a king. Someone with a royal pedigree, someone from Jerusalem, not someone who was raised as a carpenter's son in Galilee. So there was division among the people because of him. Now some of them wanted to take him, but no one laid hands on him. And then the officers come to the chief priests and the Pharisees and they ask them, why have you not brought him? Right. The officers come back and they're before them. Right. Normally the chief priest and the Pharisees, they don't always necessarily keep the same company, but they were united in the desire to apprehend Jesus. Right? So after they made this official declaration that he should be apprehended, the people went out, but when they heard him talk, it had an impact on them. They never heard anyone speak like this. Someone speaking with authority. Speaking as more than just a mortal man. Right? In John chapter 18, when the officers come to arrest him, Jesus says, I am he, and the entire squadron of soldiers fall to the ground. What the officers say is, no man has ever spoke like this man. And the Pharisees ask, are you also deceived? Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed in him? Right? Until the Sanhedrin rules on something, nobody is authorized to believe it. We are the standard to judge what is wrong. But this crowd that does not know the law is accursed. We are the authorities. Right? These common people who don't know the law like us, they're all just accursed anyway. Right? These are the elders to watch over the flock of Israel. None of us are ignorant enough to believe that somehow this man actually came from God. Now Nicodemus, this is the same one who came to Jesus by night, but he was also one of them, right? He was a ruler of the Jews, right? And he said to them, "Does our law judge a man before it hears him and knows what he is doing?" And he says, you want to arrest him for violating God's law, but what you are doing and how you are going about this is unlawful. You've already cast judgment on him. Right? In Deuteronomy 1:16 it says that I command your judges, right, to hear the cases between your brethren and judge righteously between a man and his brother or the stranger who is set before him. Right? He says you're already judging him without a trial. You're already ready to make sentence without weighing the evidence. You want to seize him unjustly and pass judgment without ever even hearing his case. Now Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and he was a ruler of the Jews. And what we later see is that many of the Pharisees, in fact, do believe in Jesus, but they're unwilling to confess for fear of what will happen to them. Nicodemus is not ready all the way to confess that he is considering Jesus not to be a deceiver, but he's willing to call them out on what they are doing themselves, that they are in violation of God's law. So they answered and said to him, "Are you also from Galilee? Search and look, for no prophet has arisen out of Galilee." So they're accusing Nicodemus and questioning, was he from Galilee? Right? And probably meant to be an insult. Right? All of us smart teachers in Jerusalem, we know better than those common hicks out in the hills. Right? Are you one of those ignorant people that are accursed? We know no prophet rises up out of Galilee. First of all, there were several prophets that had come out of the area of Galilee. One of these, for example, is Jonah. And something to think about is this term, rises up. This term, rises up, comes up every time that John is talking about the resurrection. And when you look at the prophets that actually rose up out of Galilee, there's something very unique about them. Matthew chapter 12, it says, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Right? Jonah was the ultimate example before Jesus of being dead and buried in the belly of a great fish, only to be resurrected and walk again on the land. And Jesus says his death, burial, and rising up were the sign of Jonah from Galilee. We also have Elijah, who is another example of a prophet that rose up out of Galilee. In 2 Kings chapter 2, that talks about how Elijah rose up to heaven to be with God. He does not even see death, but he goes to live with God. The Jewish leaders said no prophet rises up out of Galilee. I think the message of the Bible is that not only did prophets rise up from Galilee, but they actually do rise up. And that is the focus of what we see in them. This is the ultimate fulfillment of a prophet coming from Galilee, rising up. Right? We had Jonah, but Jesus was greater. We had Elijah, but Jesus was greater. Right? Jesus had said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Isaiah chapter 9, nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed, as when at first he lightly esteemed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterwards more heavily oppressed her by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan in Galilee of the Gentiles. So the people in the northern tribes would be the first to feel the pressures of the Assyrian Empire. Right? This would start small, but grow as the Assyrians oppressed them and overtook them. It would be a time of darkness. The sun would no longer shine on the northern kingdom of Israel. It would be gone forever as it was, and the Assyrians would now rule the land. And even though it would be a time of darkness, there would be a light that would shine in the darkness. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Isaiah is speaking in the future as something so certain that it is already considered something as being accomplished. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. Even though they were the first to face the darkness, they would be the first to have access to the light which would come into the world. And what we've seen is that the Messiah would be a source of light, a source of life to the world. He says that you have multiplied the nation and increased its joy. Right? You will add other people into this kingdom. What was the promise to Abraham? All nations would be blessed. They rejoice before you according to the joy of harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For you have broken the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor as in the day of Midian. The Messiah would take their burden, the yoke of the law, their enslavement to sin, and they would be free to walk in the light. And the source of the light would first rise up in Galilee, as in the days of Midian, whereby a small group of men, by then the entire nation of Israel would see victory. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Your question was, Nicodemus, are you an ignorant hick from Galilee? One of the common people that don't know the law as we do? Search and look. It's right there to see. No prophet rises up out of Galilee. Just search and look, Nicodemus. What did Jesus say? He said, you search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life. And these are they which testify of me. But you are not willing to come to me, that you may have life.